Leviticus chapter 4. The Lord spoke to Moses. He said, "Speak to the people of Israel and say, if anyone sins without intending to do so against any of the commandments of the Lord and does one of the forbidden things, if the one who sins is the anointed priest, his sin defiles the people. Then, for the sin which he has committed, he is to offer to the Lord a young bull, an animal from the herd without any defect, as a sacrifice for sin. He is to bring the bull before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting, lay his hand on its head, and slaughter it before the Lord. Then the anointed priest shall take a little of the blood of the bull and bring it into the tent of meeting. He shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it over the veil of the sanctuary 7 times before the Lord. Then the priest shall apply a little of the blood of the bull on the horns of the altar of incense that sends up smoke before the Lord in the tent of meeting, and he is to pour all the rest of the bull's blood at the foot of the altar for burnt offerings, that is, at the entrance to the tent of meeting. From this bull, offered as a sacrifice for sin, the priest will remove all the fat that covers the internal organs, all the fat that is on the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, the fat that is on them, and on the loins, the best part which he will remove from above the liver and kidneys, exactly as was done with what was set apart in the covenant sacrifice, and the priest shall burn these on the altar of burnt offering. The bull's skin, all its flesh, its head, legs, internal organs, and intestines, the whole of the bull must be carried outside the camp to a place that is clean, the place where the ashes from the fat are thrown away, and the bull must be burnt there upon the wood on the fire. It must be burned where the ashes are thrown. If the whole community of Israel has sinned without intending to do so, and without the congregation being aware of it, has done something that is forbidden by the commandments of the Lord, and have incurred guilt, the congregation is to offer a young bull as sacrifice for sin, an animal of the herd without any defect, as soon as the sin of which they have been guilty is discovered. The animal must be brought before the tent of meeting. The elders of the community shall lay their hands on the bull's head before the Lord, and it must be slaughtered before the Lord. Then the anointed priest is to carry a little of the blood of the bull into the tent of meeting. He is to dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it on the veil before the Lord 7 times. Then he shall apply a little of the blood on the horns of the altar that stands before the Lord inside the tent of meeting, and pour out all the rest of the blood at the foot of the altar of burnt offering at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Then the priest shall remove all the fat from the animal and burn it on the altar. He shall do the same thing with this bull as he did with the bull for the sacrifice of sin. When the priest has performed the sacrifice for the people's sin, they will be forgiven. The priest must have the bull taken out of the camp, and he shall burn it as he burned the first one. This is the sacrifice for the sin of the congregation. When a leader sins by doing one of the things forbidden by the commandments of the Lord his God, without intending to do so, he incurs guilt. After that, if he recalls his sin, or anyone else calls his attention to it, he is to bring a goat as an offering, a male without any defect. He is to lay his hand on the goat's head and slaughter it in the place where the animal for the burnt offerings are slaughtered. This is a sacrifice for sin. The priest shall take a little of the goat's blood on his finger and apply it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering. Then he shall pour out the rest of its blood at the foot of the altar for burnt offerings, and burn all the fat on the altar, as with the fat of the covenant sacrifice. This is how the priest is to offer the sacrifice for the sin of this leader, to free him from his sin, and he will be forgiven. If an ordinary individual sins without intending to do so, and incurs guilt by doing something forbidden by the commandments of the Lord, and after that someone calls his attention to the sin he has committed, he is to bring a goat as an offering, a female without any defect. He is to lay his hand on the victim's head and slaughter it in the place where the animals for the burnt offering are slaughtered. The priest shall take a little of the goat's blood on his finger and apply it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering. Then he shall pour out all the rest of the blood at the foot of the altar. He shall remove all the fat, as the fat was removed for the covenant sacrifice, and the priest shall burn it on the altar as a sweet aroma that appeases the Lord. This is how the priest is to offer the sacrifice for the man's sin, and he will be forgiven. If anyone wishes to bring a lamb as a sin offering, he is to bring a female without any defect. He is to lay his hand on the victim's head and slaughter it as a sacrifice for sin in the place where the animals for the burnt offering are slaughtered. The priest shall take a little of the blood of this sacrifice on his finger and apply it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering. Then he shall pour out all the rest of the blood at the foot of the altar. He shall remove its fat, as was done for the sheep in the covenant sacrifice, and the priest shall burn it all on the altar, in addition to the other oblations of the Lord. That is how the priest is to offer the sacrifice for the man's sin, and he will be forgiven.